Adrian Griffin out as the Milwaukee Bucks head coach, replaced in the interim by Joe Prunty, who's back coaching the Bucks. It feels like we're just going to keep doing this over and over again for a long time. We need the Bulls to do that with Jim Boylan, if I'm being honest. He makes 43 games, and the biggest name we have seen reported as someone they are going to full court press is Doc Rivers, the former Clippers, the former Celtics, the former 76ers head coach, who's now an analyst at ESPN on their main broadcast on ABC. Brendan, I got to tell you, I'm not exactly shocked that Griffin is gone. This feels like it was mounting. This feels like it was a team that has been disappointed in a lot of ways. We haven't heard anyone talk yet. According to reports I've read, John Horst, the GM, will talk Wednesday before the Bucks host the Cavs. Prunty, I'm sure, will talk then as well. We'll see what Giannis and Damian and all these guys have to say. In flipping through other coverage, Mark Stein led his newsletter after this, saying that someone in the league told him a couple weeks ago that if Terry Stotts was still there and hadn't had the disagreement with Adrian Griffin, he would be coaching the team already. So this, I guess, isn't a surprise, but what a disaster for a team that is 30-3 and has one of the best players in the world to have to fire the coach they fired Bud for not even 50 games into a season.
Yeah, this one's complicated, right? There's a lot of layers. I think, firstly, kind of a dub for Terry Stotts. I think he was, a dub for Adrian Griffin regarding Terry Stotts. If there was some sort of tension there or, Adrian Griffin correctly maybe reading the writing that had been written onto the wall by Bucks management, I think he was right. He was right that guy was kind of there to replace him. So salute to Griffin on that one. Not salute to him for losing his job, and not salute to him for not coaching this team very well, right? I think there's a few things here, and you can feel free to interject if one of them jumps out to you. Chris Mannix had a similar report to Mark Stein, Chris, of just had heard rumblings type of thing. But
Boogie Cousins is totally right. There's snakes in the grass all the time,
Yes, sure.
Did you like that? Did you like that poll? Did you like the Boogie Cousins snakes in the grass poll? It's been a while since I thought of that.
Yeah, George Karl, shout out. Maybe George Karl come coach the Bucks. I think, yeah, and like the thing that you finally are seeing in some of these insider type people is that Griffin finally had even lost Giannis, which I think was probably, I guess, the place chronologically you would have to start. But I just want to start by saying the reason it doesn't surprise anybody is because the mistakes we all notice in the first 2 weeks of the season from the Bucks really have not gotten better. They have a worse point differential than the Cavs, Knicks, and Pelicans, despite being tied for second in the East. They are still middling in transition defense overall. They've improved statistically, but the most damning stat I think you would point to if you're following Milwaukee's transition defensive problems, which have been there all season, is that teams still run on them more than any other team. So while they might be getting stops, and that can kind of fluctuate game to game based on opponent or week to week, the fact that teams are still challenging them there as if they aren't worried about it, I think tells you all you need to know. Malik Beasley has started every game he has appeared in, while if you look at the box score of Monday night's game in which the Bucks barely beat Detroit in Detroit, Pat Connaughton, 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Malik Beasley, 35 minutes. Portis, Connaughton, and Crowder have all struggled all season. That is basically the only depth you have. You can't, and I know Crowder got hurt, but he's been back for 4 games, hasn't made a huge impact. You can't afford to have those 3 vets be misused or not bought in or whatever it is, and that's been the case all year. Meanwhile, Malik Beasley's kind of free to do whatever he wants, even though he's not really helping, defensively at least. And then I would even say, looking further down the depth chart than that, Chris, Marjon Beauchamp. I know that he is an inconsistent young player. Those guys always struggle to get minutes on championship contenders. But once again, it's kind of all they have. He has DNPs in 4 of his past 5 games. He's just out of the rotation. They're playing 9 guys, really only 8. It's at a certain point you have to pull the plug on something if it's so clearly not working. And I honestly would give a lot of kudos to the Bucks front office for just bailing on something rather than trying to play it out, because as that insane DeJounte Murray rumor from last week showed us, this team's desperate. They're feeling pressure. And so if he wasn't going to be the guy to get them over the hump, then you should move on.
They're very much in a zone that few teams end up in, Brendan, which is you make big moves. And this is across like all sports. They end up in the zone that very few teams end up in, where the pressure is so high that I think this ends up being justified to some degree. Some of the reporting about Doc's involvement is, we'll get to that, I guess, when we talk about Doc, but that part of it I find quite fascinating. About what I want to learn more about that before I kind of have any firm, I think, opinions about it, but there's something interesting going on there. But they get to the zone that it's like the biggest soccer clubs in Europe get here. The Yankees historically have been here. I think the Lakers' job kind of feels like this right now as well, where it's like you don't really get a runway. You kind of just have to produce at the highest level or you're at the risk of being fired. And I get that. You can't change Giannis. You made your big swing. You traded for Damian Lillard. You don't have the assets in the way that the NBA works. You go buy other players you might want or trade for other guys you might want. This is your roster. This is what you have. It's about maximizing what that is. And if you lose Giannis, you kind of don't have anything else. And Dame hasn't, I don't think, spoken about this a ton. But I'm sure he feels a type of way about the Terry Stotts thing, considering Stotts was brought in the first place to be someone that could help them maximize Dame, because he coached him in Portland for so long, and they had a really productive partnership with the Trailblazers. So I think this is fully justified. This team is underwhelming. The record, I think, inflates them a little bit. I mean, we have not had them in our inner ring circle of contenders, right? We just haven't. I don't think anyone really does at this point. The defense has been not good despite Dame obviously is very different than Drew Holiday, but the other personnel hasn't changed too much. The defense feels qualitatively worse. This is the one thing you can do to try to reset the season and win. Maybe it's unfair to Adrian Griffin to some degree because you put him in the situation in the first place, but that's the nature of the NBA. Things are going to be unfair sometimes. Life is going to be unfair sometimes. I get 100% why they've gone down this route. I absolutely understand why we ended up here.
Yeah, so the thing I want to circle back to is you mentioned that this is the guy they fired Bud for. Not really, right? Because I'm not sure they knew who they were going to hire. I think they fired Bud because of Jimmy Butler. Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's fair.
And I think that kind of is an original sin of this whole thing, which is that you shouldn't have a candidate already underlined when you go into a search. I think that would be dumb too, but they allowed, I think, Giannis's preferences to win out here. And I think you and I need to kind of take an L, because we were very vocal supporters of going that direction, hiring a former player, hiring somebody who the current players on your roster are in support of, and that seems to have really doomed this. Well, we don't know the specifics. Maybe more will come out, but the fact that Giannis wanted him seems to have been probably reason number one that he got hired, and that was a mistake. The other guys that they looked at, Kenny Atkinson, who also has had his name come out in the aftermath of now Griffin being fired, as somebody that they'll try to talk to. I'm not sure why the Warriors would give him up midseason themselves. They also looked at Charles Lee, who they let leave, if you remember, and now he's in Boston supporting Joe Mazzulla. Feels like that would have been, another very solid option. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. And then James Borrego, who I don't think ever should have gotten fired from the Hornets, but has kind of wandered around and can't remember where he ended up, but he is back on an assistant staff this season. I don't think you can ever say, well, they should have just hired this guy and everything would have been fine. But I do think that it was a mistake to probably be so rash with Bud, and it was a mistake to listen so much to Giannis, I would say. Again, all in hindsight, but maybe the only thing to look at now is whether Doc is the solution to improving this thing, because he or whoever takes this job is going to have a hell of a task on their hands to turn this all around in 40 games and get them ready to be a real title contender by April.
So do you like the Doc hire? Do you like the idea of bringing in Doc Rivers to be the guy to try to turn around your season?
Well, you go, because I just
stakes.
blabbered for 5 minutes about the whole history from last May on. You tell me if you like the Doc fit.
I'm very torn on it, and here's why. Very torn's probably strong. Just torn. On one hand, I think this is the practical decision. This is the practical hire to get someone who isn't going to get overwhelmed, who, if you're bringing in someone from outside, and I think you kind of have to, you don't have, like, there's not a Ty Lue a la, like, the closest firing I can think of that compares to this is David Black getting fired by the Cavs. Mm-hmm. And they had Ty Lue in waiting for a reason, because they wanted insurance. The Bucks don't have that safety net. That probably was Terry Stotts. He's not there.
What's funny, though, about that comparison is that Stotts is more similar to Blatt and Griffin's more similar to Lue. So they tried to get their Ty Lue first, and they screwed that up, too. So I've seen that comparison. Obviously, from a timing and a pressure standpoint, I get the similarities. But they were trying to get their young ex-player, up-and-coming coach guy, and they actually just kind of botched that. I guess it shows how hard it is to find a Ty Lue, right?
Yeah, and it's the energy is obviously a little bit different, but I think the idea, the kind of coach gets overwhelmed, doesn't really know what he's doing kind of thing ends up being there. So I get the practicality part of this. The thing I don't like about it is we kind of just know what Doc Rivers is as a coach now. We kind of understand all of his warts. We understand his limitations. I don't think you're going to get someone, like, you're going to get someone who's going to come in and is going to probably hit some singles and do a really competent job and do some version of maximizing what this team is in a very safe way. And I get the appeal of that. Something a little more audacious, which I get carries more risk. I think there's more upside to what this team is. Like, I don't know if Doc is coming in and exactly being the perfect coach from a management, like, personality-wise, I think that part's going to be perfect with him. I think that's kind of the right angle of this, to just say, you're probably going to just get along fine with Dame and Middleton and Giannis, and specifically Giannis and Dame more than anybody else. It's the actual X's and O's and how he's going to coach at the highest level of the playoffs, where they want to be, against Joe Mazzulla, against Nick Nurse, against whomever else. That what we've seen from him the last several years, that Doc is not really in that upper echelon of coaches anymore. We just kind of have seen that bear out, and that to me is the concern. But considering the situation, I get it. And if you're just trying to balm the situation and slap a very competent Band-Aid over this wound, that makes sense.
Which is the bed you've made for yourself, right?
Yes.
You can't be audacious on January 23rd. You tried audacious in June, right? And now you're here. Like, are they going to go out and get, like, woo Charles Lee back into the building and start from scratch? It's just, it does suck, right? Like, it is sort of awful timing all around, but they did it to themselves. They hired the wrong coach, and now it's like the problem with hiring Doc is you don't convince Doc to come and say, oh, and we'll reevaluate in April. Let's see how you do. You're here for half a season. That's disrespectful. Doc Rivers hangs up the phone on that, right? It's not the type of job security.
He can be like, I have a lucrative as all heck deal with the worldwide leader in sports to call NBA games. I'm gonna get to call the finals. Give me, like, which he could probably go back to at some point in theory, especially if, like,
but that stuff doesn't happen. I was almost just throwing it out there as, like, obviously that's not an option, but it would be the best thing for Milwaukee, right? If they could just get a little bit of a feeling out process, almost treat Doc like an interim. but that's not an option. The reason that I think it could work is because of Damian Giannis. I think that the times we've seen it not be great with Doc, I would say the most high-profile failures, so to speak, you're talking the series where Josh Smith killed you, where he was coaching the Clippers against the Rockets and James Harden is on the bench and they lose, right? That was, I don't know. I was a teenager. I'm not going to pretend like I know what happened there. Bad. The bubble, where we forget the Clippers were just fully healthy and just didn't have anything. Extenuating circumstances, to say the least. I'm not giving him a break there, but whatever. The Hawks series in 2021, Ben Simmons has literally never recovered from that. And I guess you could say last year, but again, that's James Harden, and even Joel Embiid didn't step up when he needed to. I don't really pin that on coaching, even though it's cute to bring up the blown 3-2 lead thing. So
yeah,
he has gotten, when he has teams that fit and teams that have star talent that he can connect with, a la the Big Three in Boston once upon a time, he tends to get the most out of those groups. And so I think Dame and Giannis are the types of people that I could see it working with. But you're still talking about, some of the problems where Doc, he doesn't always love to stagger guys, and he puts these all bench lineups out there, and they are a top-heavy team. He seems to be the guy that gets the most out of the developmental guys kind of or the stars. So what would this mean for Beauchamp and Jackson in a very compressed, pressurized environment now? Do they even play, or is it just we're riding the vets and I'm making my money here, I'm going to try to win? Those would be questions that I would have for sure.
I think those are fair, and I think to your point, I think the Giannis Dame part of this has to be the most important part of this. We haven't seen this exactly. Would be shocked if they weren't consulted in this and saying, who do you guys want? Who are you interested in? Who can we bring into that would make you happy at this moment in time?
And then maybe take it into consideration a little less than you did the last time. Ask, and then maybe write it down on a note and kind of like put it on your desk and, refer to it periodically, but don't maybe have it be the end all be all.
Yeah, unless they're probably also just being like, hey, we would maybe like Doc Rivers. Can we do that? I mean, if they say Mark Jackson, I'm absolutely I'm losing that napkin and being like, well, guys, I'm going through a tunnel. Can I call you back in a couple minutes? And you just be like, you just forget it ever happened. But Doc, you kind of take it a little more seriously. In that sense, if I'm going to frame it that way, Brennan, the fact that they're going Doc and not Mark Jackson as like the veteran coach is that's at least a win for the Bucks, I would say. Like they could have done worse.
Mark Jackson's not coaching in the NBA again.
Okay, I agree, but I'm saying until it's always going to be that name that someone's on Twitter arguing
I'm surprised we haven't heard Jeff Van Gundy's name, if I'm being honest.
I don't think he's ever coaching the NBA again, just because
for different reasons.
Yeah. And he's just also been Doc at the very least was a coach last season. If you go to Van Gundy, right, he hasn't been an NBA coach in how
15
long?
15 years.
I'm sorry. Knows more about basketball than I will ever know. That is, I think a little too much time away for me to feel comfortable about it. Doc, at least, has been coaching regularly for, decades at this point.
The last thing I would say here is more short-term, assuming it is Doc, even if he comes in soon and flies out from LA to meet them wherever they are right now on their schedule, I would say they're in for probably a couple of bad losses here and there, and they can't really afford that. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for them to fall behind Philly, for instance, but Cleveland is knocking on the door. The Heat just got Terry Rozier, which we're about to talk about. The Pacers just got Siakam. The Bucks don't have such a big cushion that they can afford some growing pains. So, let's just assume it's Doc, but whoever it is, it's not just about hitting the ground running to try to win a championship this spring. It's also you really can't lose ground here unless you want to make it even harder spot for yourself. The Bucks have been saving Adrian Griffin's ass all season because they're the best clutch team in the NBA. They have like a plus 25 net rating. Can't count on that forever. So whoever comes in needs to win and win right away.
Fill in the blank, Brandon. We'll move on to our last topic of the day, the Terry Rozier trade. They are the blank team you would expect to get out of these. So like first, second, third, fourth, fifth. If you're picking who's getting out of these, where are they right now post this firing as who'd expect to get out of the Eastern Conference?
The crazy thing is I probably would still say second.
Same. And I feel a little queasy about it. I get a little stressed out thinking about that because I'm like, could it be Philly? Are the Heat just really the second answer always until proven wrong?
But here's the thing, to your point earlier, part of why you have to make this move and part of why, not to make it always about the teams we cover, but the Suns are in a little bit of a similar situation. They are all in for this season, and why I entertained Frank Vogel getting fired there, or the Lakers point to your point, why Darvin Ham didn't get fired last year is because they did have trades. Why the Suns and the Bucks would seriously contemplate firing their coaches in a season where they're also all in is they don't have trades. So that's a probably point against them, even if you believe in a coaching change helping here, maybe down the line is Philly could get better, Cleveland could even get better, the Knicks, Heat, and Pacers have already all made trades. That's working against them. They might have one tiny move to make to solidify some bench help, but this is their team.